What's up, friends? Hope you're having a great day. And I want to kick this video off by saying a big thank you to everyone that was in the trenches with me a few days ago, helping me research the fight between O'Malley and Dvalishvili, and also the co-main event between Grasso and Shevchenko. I love researching fights with you guys because you always drop major knowledge. And what I also love about these research sessions is at the beginning of them, everyone in the research session is kind of divided on how they see the fight playing out. But by the time we finish researching a fight, pretty much everyone in the session is on the same side. And that was definitely the case with these two fights that we researched this week. But don't worry, if you don't have 2 hours to go and research this fight yourself, we've got you covered. In this video, I'm going to be summarizing everything that we learned in these two research sessions with some video clips to back up all the points that I'm going to be making. And at the end of the day, the hard work that we put into researching these fights is the main reason why we've been able to make a profit every single year for the last 15 years. At the end of the day, hard work is undefeated, and the work that we put into researching these fights is the difference between winning and losing. We make a profit on 70% of UFC events. In fact, I think the exact statistic or the exact number is something like 69.3%, something like that. But close enough is close enough, and this is one of the best profitability charts you will ever see. At the end of the day, if you have come to watch this video and you want to know about how the fights are most likely to go this weekend, all the risk factors associated with betting each of the fighters this weekend, the strengths and weaknesses of each of the fighters this weekend, you've come to the right place. Because on this channel and in this community, we do not deal in bullshit. We deal in facts, we deal in reality, and we deal in things that cannot be argued. We don't deal in opinions, we deal on facts. We deal in things that we have seen in past fights which enable us to predict with a good degree of certainty how fights are likely to play out. And we do that through hard work. We don't have crystal balls. We're no smarter than anyone else. We do it by gluing ourselves to this seat, to this desk, every fucking week for the last 15 years. And we put the time in. Because hard work is undefeated. Never forget that. So at the end of the day, if ever we place a bet and it loses, this is normal in the game, right? This is normal. No one can win every bet. Good bets don't always win. Bad bets don't always lose. But being profitable comes down to showing up every week and being consistent. And we show up every week and we're ruthlessly consistent. And this is why over such a long period of time, we've remained profitable. And so irrespective of what happens in the Dvalishvili O'Malley fight this weekend, if you consistently get your money into strong positions over a very long period of time, you will make money. And you know how I know that? Because I've been doing it for 15 fucking years. I've been doing it for 15 fucking years. And by the time the curtain comes down on my career, I'm determined to go out as one of the best sports bettors in the history of the world. And we're going to do it. Do you know why? Because we work harder than anybody. And so in this breakdown video today, we're going to go into extreme depth from a betting perspective on all of the main card fights taking place this weekend. And win or lose, whether we're right or wrong about the fighter that gets their hand raised at the end of the night, I guarantee you this. I guarantee you this. We will cover absolutely every angle on each one of these fights and every single thing you need to know if you're betting these fights this weekend. And again, in a vacuum, there are no promises. There are no guarantees. On any given night, any fighter could lose. There's nothing we can do about that. But it's all about consistency, hard work, and showing up. And we do those three things extremely well. We're here every week. We work hard every day, and we consistently get our money in strong positions over a long period of time. You cannot produce a profitability chart that looks this good unless you're ruthlessly consistent and hardworking. So let profitability charts like this send a strong message to you that the information we're going to be going through in this video is absolute gold. And we got the receipts to back it up because we'll be showing plenty of fight footage. And I hope you're going to find it useful. So if you are, please hit the like button below. Subscribe if you haven't already. because I would love to feel the love and to know if you guys appreciate these breakdowns or not. That would be great to me. So I would really appreciate it. So, let's get into it. So in order for you to understand why I think Sean O'Malley is a good bet this weekend, you have to understand my philosophy and approach to pre-fight betting. You see, live betting on the UFC is my speciality. You can see from the profitability chart in the background, it's my bread and butter. It's what I do best. And we make a profit almost every week live betting on the UFC over the last 8 years. And so when it comes to pre-fight betting on the UFC, I have a very specific strategy that enables me to make a profit every year. But it involves being very, very conservative and only placing pre-fight moneyline bets in two situations. In situations where I can either overwhelmingly stack the odds in my favor and get a very favorable risk to reward ratio, or when I can get an opportunity to bet on a fighter who has almost no way to lose, which is very rare in the UFC these days. It's a very chaotic, unpredictable sport, but it does happen from time to time. So what do I mean when I talk about overwhelmingly stacking the odds in my favor? Well, when I talk about overwhelmingly stacking the odds in my favor, I mean getting an extremely good risk to reward ratio for my money in a situation where my guy is very, very likely to win. And so when we take a look at the odds on Sean O'Malley, we can see that he's currently an average of around 1.74, which is going to be, if I just pull up my implied probability calculator, minus 135 for an implied probability of 57%. So at the moment, the betting odds have got O'Malley close to 50-50 in this fight, right? Just a slight lean towards O'Malley. And if we look at the odds on Dvalishvili, we can see that he's around a 2.10 underdog, which is going to be plus 110 for an implied probability of 48%. So very, very close to a 50-50 fight. Very kind of similar, reward the risk payout on both guys, right? You're getting roughly even money for your bet. So what we want to start off by doing, before we consider how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, is looking at any X factors or intangibles that could influence the outcome of this matchup. So, as ever, we'll start off by taking a look at the tail of the tape. So we can see that Dvalishvili is 33 years old, 5'6" with a 68-inch reach. And we can see that O'Malley is 29 years old, 5'11" with a 72-inch reach. So already we've got a couple of X factors to go in favour of O'Malley. The first being his age. Now, Merab Dvalishvili is not crazy old at 33 years old. However, we know that fighters in the lighter weight classes start to decline earlier in their career than they do in the heavier weight classes. So 33-year-olds for bantamweight is starting to get pretty old. Whereas O'Malley, 29 years old, he should still be making big improvements from fight to fight because he hasn't even hit his prime yet. And so straight away, there's just one kind of tick in the, if you've got a column of reasons to bet both guys, you got O'Malley here, you've got Dvalishvili here, there's a little tick there for O'Malley. He's a bit younger, hasn't hit his prime. And while Dvalishvili may not necessarily be declining at 33 years old, you certainly wouldn't expect him to make, big improvements at this stage in his career. You'd expect him to plateau from here. We can also see that O'Malley has got a bit of a reach advantage, right? So a 4-inch reach advantage for a guy like O'Malley that knows how to use it, fights long, has a great jab. We know that Dvalishvili has pretty bad striking defense. 4-inch reach advantage is another nice little tick in the Sean O'Malley column. He's also taller. Now, don't get me wrong, the different body types do have strengths and weaknesses. Dvalishvili, with that small, compact frame, it enables him to shoot, deep in on his opponent's legs and hips. But the 4-inch reach advantage will certainly help O'Malley a lot in this fight because he really knows how to use it. So straight away, we got a couple things going in O'Malley's favour. But throughout this breakdown and when we're, taking a look at this fight and trying to predict which is the strongest side to be on, we've really got to remember the probabilities. the implied probabilities and the odds on both guys, right? And we've got to remember the implied probability on O'Malley's odds is currently 57%. So not only is O'Malley a bit younger and probably making big improvements from fight to fight, which we're seeing, and not only is he longer, taller, bit of a size advantage, has the reach advantage, but on top of this, there are also a couple of other factors which could have a big negative impact on Dvalishvili's performance this weekend. The first being, and we're going to do this in chronological order, the fact that Dvalishvili recently cut his right eye. And there was a huge media storm about this where Dana White was talking about it publicly and calling Dvalishvili an idiot. He was cutting his own stitches out, all that kind of stuff. That happened pretty recently, and we weren't sure how that cut was going to heal, how well it was going to heal, because I think it was just a couple of weeks ago, and obviously that's not a lot of time for a big cut to heal on the eye. So 2 days ago, which would be the 9th of September, the embedded videos started to drop on YouTube, and there's a shot here zoomed in on Dvalishvili's face in just a moment, which we will pause. And you can see here that the cut is nowhere near healed, like not even close to being healed. You can see that it's quite wide. It's in a bad area right on the eye. And it doesn't even look like it's scabbed over. There's still a definite gap there. And we know that one of Sean O'Malley's biggest weapons is the jab. As soon as O'Malley starts to jab that eye, that's going to open that cut up immediately. It's in a bad location, and straight away, before the fight even starts, Dvalishvili is going to probably be wearing quite a lot of damage on his face within the first couple of minutes, because this cut is wide enough and long enough to bleed quite heavily as soon as O'Malley starts to land clean shots on that eye. And O'Malley is so accurate, and he's so persistent with the jab, so accurate with the jab, you could pretty much guarantee that O'Malley is going to target this eye. And it's in a bad location. If O'Malley starts to open that cut up, starts to widen it, it is in the location where, you know, a fight could potentially be stopped. Now, you know, we're not going to go out and we're going to say, you know, O'Malley can get a stoppage by opening his cut up and all that kind of stuff. We're not going to make crazy speculations here. However, what we do know is that judges should be scoring rounds primarily on damage and visible damage. And so where we've got two top tier bantamweights here, and, you know, a fight that is likely to be very competitive, we know that if rounds turn out to be relatively close and competitive, a lot of the time visible damage will be the deciding factor in who the judges score the round for. And you can pretty much guarantee that from the first round, O'Malley's going to open this cut back up, and Dvalishvili will start bleeding again heavily from round one. So straight away, if there are kind of close rounds, competitive rounds early in the fight, they're more likely to go towards O'Malley. So this is a definite X factor in favour of betting O'Malley this weekend. And on top of that, there are also rumours that Dvalishvili has had a staph infection recently. Now, apparently he's been cleared by a UFC doctor. He said it's absolutely fine, etc, 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 etc. But as we know, every time there's speculation that a fighter is coming into a fight after recently having a staph infection, they always deny it. They never admit to it. And then if it does turn out that they have a staph infection, after the fight, they come out and say, yeah, you know, I had a staph infection a few weeks out, took antibiotics, it wrecked my immune system, it tired me out, I took the fight anyway, yada, yada, yada. Same old story. We get it all the time, right? We get it all the damn time. And so we don't know if this is staph or not. Just because Dvalishvili's saying it isn't and he got cleared by a UFC doctor, it doesn't really prove anything to me. I've been in this game too long to trust, you know, what fighters tell me. And at the end of the day, this could very well be staph. Now, what I've done is try to really zoom in on it in Photoshop to get a really good look at it. But unfortunately, even the original image doesn't really give us a very good look at it. I'll show you guys now in Photoshop. We just bring this over here. And I'm choosing this image because it's kind of like the best one out of all the ones that he posts on Instagram. I don't know enough about staph to know if this is a staph infection or not. I don't know enough about You know, I don't know enough about anything staph infection related to know if this is definitely staph or not. I don't even know if there is a way to know if this is definitely staph or not. What I will say is people are speculating that it is staph, and there's no smoke without fire. So if there is a chance that this is staph, then we need to factor it into how we cap this fight, because it's something to consider, right? We have to consider all things. Have to consider the possibility that O'Malley might be coming into this fight injured, but at least with Dvalishvili, we have a little bit of evidence that he might be. And this picture was posted a week ago. Who knows when this picture was actually taken, but this picture was posted a week ago. So if he did have a staph infection a week ago and has been on antibiotics, we know that's likely to affect his cardio big time, which is a huge factor to take into consideration, because we know Dvalishvili's cardio is his biggest weapon coming into this fight against Sean O'Malley. So as we work through breaking down this fight and talking about this fight from a betting point of view and why I think Sean O'Malley's good value, we've got to keep reminding ourselves of the implied probability on Sean's odds, right? We've got to keep reminding ourselves of the probability on Sean's odds. So Sean's odds currently carry an implied probability of 57%. And even before we get into considering how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, we know O'Malley's bigger and has a reach advantage. He's younger. Merab Dvalishvili for sure still has damage to his right eye, which will very likely open back up immediately as soon as Sean O'Malley starts to land clean hard jabs, which he will. And then it's also possible that Dvalishvili has a staph infection. So already there are 4 X factors in favour of betting Sean O'Malley this weekend before we even get into how they match up from a stylistic point of view. And this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about finding bets where we can overwhelmingly stack the odds in our favour. I've only placed 20 moneyline bets on the UFC this year. I'm not one of these guys that's going to place 10, 20, 30 bets on a card. Because guess what? Nobody has a crystal ball, and Vegas wasn't built on setting inaccurate odds. If you're placing tons of bets on a card and you think you can be profitable long term, you're kidding yourself. You're absolutely kidding yourself. Because Vegas wouldn't be as successful as it is if inaccurate odds on sports was a very common thing. So that's why you got to pick your spots, be conservative, keep it tight, and look for opportunities where you can overwhelmingly stack the odds in your favour. And here we're in a situation where we can bet a guy close to that even money odds range, so we're getting a very good return on the money that we're putting at risk. And he's got a cut above the eye already before a punch is thrown. He might have a staph infection. He's smaller, he's giving up a reach advantage, and he's older. This is the kind of situation I'm talking about when I talk about stack the odds in your favour. The reason why we've been profitable every single fucking year for the last 15 years is because we're not dum-dums. We only put our money at risk when we know we are overwhelmingly stacking the odds in our favour. So now let's explain why this is also potentially a great stylistic matchup for Sean O'Malley as well. So obviously, no matter who you lean towards, in this fight, no matter who you think is going to win, we can all agree that this is a classic striker versus grappler matchup. And if the fight goes to the ground, Dvalishvili is probably going to have a big advantage. And if the fight stays standing, then O'Malley is probably going to have a pretty big advantage. In fact, he definitely does. Anyone that tells you otherwise is fucking crazy. So after researching this matchup, what I can tell you is that Sean O'Malley is a far better grappler than Dvalishvili is a striker. And what I mean by that is, on the ground, even though Dvalishvili has the advantage, and he will definitely win this fight if it goes to the ground, O'Malley can handle himself on the ground, hang in there on the ground, not take too much damage, and be all right. You know what I mean? O'Malley might not beat Dvalishvili in a grappling heavy fight, but he can hang with him. He can be reasonably competitive. He can get to a point where he's not getting overwhelmed or not taking too much damage. it can be a kind of Henry Cejudo, Peter Yan type situation, right? Where he's getting controlled very bad, but he's not getting hurt very bad. He's not getting close to being finished. But on the feet, Dvalishvili is absolutely cooked. The skill gap between him and O'Malley is absolutely enormous. And every single second that this fight is on the feet, Merab will be at constant risk of being knocked out. O'Malley is an absolute sniper. He's one of the best strikers in the UFC. He's accurate. He's efficient. He throws a diverse range of strikes. He's difficult to read. The guy is just an absolute weapon. And we know Dvalishvili has poor striking defense, doesn't have the best footwork or movement, and is wide open on the feet. And you know what? Every single round starts standing. And Dvalishvili isn't a finisher. If we look at his record, he's got 19 pro fights. And he only has one win inside the distance in his last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So only one win inside the distance in his last 10 fights against Marlon Moraes. And the irony of that fight is that Dvalishvili almost got knocked out in round 1. Moraes didn't get the job done, then adrenaline dumped and faded in round 2. So Dvalishvili's not a finisher. And I very much doubt that he's going to be able to finish O'Malley. And so O'Malley's got 5 rolls of the dice here, right? Every round starts standing. Dvalishvili's a sitting duck on the feet. And we know when the fight is standing, every single second that the fight is standing, Dvalishvili's going to be getting lit up bad. And we know how dangerous of a striker Sean O'Malley is. Look at how much damage he was able to inflict on a guy like Marlon Vera. You know, he turned an elite striker like Peter Yan into a grappler. That speaks volumes. This guy is an absolute nightmare on the feet. And so we don't need to go through the footage on how big O'Malley's advantages are when it comes to striking. Just take my word for it. They're very, very big. Go do your own research if you disagree, but you'd be blind to disagree. So ultimately, this fight is going to come down to whether or not O'Malley can keep the fight standing for long enough periods of time to score enough points on the feet to outstrike Dvalishvili and potentially win a decision if it gets to that, right? If he doesn't manage to knock Dvalishvili out. So what I will say at this point is Dvalishvili will almost certainly take Sean O'Malley down in this fight because O'Malley's takedown defense isn't bulletproof and Dvalishvili is absolutely relentless. However, there's always a trade-off when it comes to UFC, or almost always a trade-off. Every once in a while you get these unicorns that don't have the typical weaknesses that you associate with certain types of fighters, but Dvalishvili is not that. So generally what you have with MMA grapplers is you either have guys that are very strong, very physically imposing, have great grappling control and an abundance of physicality, or you have guys that are absolute cardio machines but lack the kind of physicality to hold their opponents down and control them. And Dvalishvili is definitely one of those guys that lacks physicality. So if we give examples of the two, a guy that has an abundance of strength and physicality and strong grappling control would be someone like an Andre Petroski, right? But Petroski doesn't have the cardio to grapple hard for 3 rounds. If you make him work hard for takedowns, if you scramble back up to your feet a few times, Petroski will fade very quickly. But if he gets on top of you, it's like having a grand piano or a car on top of you. His grappling control is so strong and heavy. And then you've got guys like Merab Dvalishvili on the other end of the spectrum who can grapple their absolute balls off for 25 minutes and not even break a sweat or breathe heavy. They're absolutely relentless. But because they've got that top tier cardio and that relentlessness, they sacrifice the power and the physicality they need to hold guys down and control them. And a really good stat to highlight this point is the stats on the Dvalishvili versus Peter Yan fight. You can see that Dvalishvili attempted 49 takedowns on Peter Yan in this fight, which is unbelievable. Like 49 takedowns is probably a record for the most takedowns attempted in a UFC fight. I actually asked ChatGPT and it said that the record for most takedowns in a single fight was actually Cain Velasquez against Junior Dos Santos, and he had 33 takedown attempts. Well, clearly Dvalishvili has smashed through that, but ChatGPT obviously didn't factor this fight in when I was asking it what the record was. But anyway, I digress. The statistic of Dvalishvili only succeeding or only completing 11 takedowns out of 49 kind of highlights the fact that Dvalishvili's grappling control is very bad, because you're never going to get Khabib Nurmagomedov or Islam Makhachev or Hamzat Chimaev or Bo Nickel or any of these other really strong, physically imposing grapplers attempt 49 takedowns in a fight. Why? Because their grappling control is so heavy, they don't need to take you down 49 times. They don't need to take you down 11 times. If they take you down once or twice per round, their grappling control is strong enough to hold you down and keep you down. So it's great that Dvalishvili has the cardio and the work rate and the persistence to shoot 49 takedowns in a fight. But the fact that he only completed 22% of them shows that his grappling control, his offensive wrestling isn't good. Because the fact that he completed 11 takedowns but still had to shoot 49 times shows that he just couldn't hold Peter Yan down. And we're going to show you some footage of this. Like, imagine like you're never going to get a strong grappler shooting that many takedowns. So it's good that Merab can do that, but it does kind of highlight the weaknesses in his skill set. And so this is really interesting, because while Sean O'Malley does give up takedowns, his takedown offense isn't terrible, but it's not amazing either. O'Malley is pretty good at working his way back up to his feet, especially early in fights. And so what you notice about Dvalishvili is when he takes guys down and he's like trying to hold them down and like wet blanket them up against the cage or on the ground, he doesn't really do a lot. He doesn't, attack with submissions. He doesn't really land much ground and pound. What he does throw in ground and pound positions doesn't do much damage. He never really gets back control on guys like we saw Bilal do to Leon Edwards, or, he never really puts guys in bad positions on the ground. He's very good at taking them down, but then he's not good at keeping them down. They can usually pop back up to their feet pretty quickly. And of course, with the way MMA fights should be scored, we know that those kind of takedowns don't really score, right? If you take your opponent down, but you don't really do any damage with it, you don't really attack with any submissions, those kind of takedowns shouldn't score very much. Whereas when we look at O'Malley, the amount of damage that he's going to be able to inflict on the feet, especially with the fact that Dvalishvili hasn't fully healed that cut yet, I just think it's going to be very difficult for Dvalishvili to outscore O'Malley in this matchup. Now, because Dvalishvili is so relentless, and because his cardio is so amazing, and because his grappling is so persistent, the biggest risk to betting O'Malley this weekend is obviously Dvalishvili doing what he did to Peter Yan and wearing Sean O'Malley out to the point where he can then hold O'Malley down. Ironically, he couldn't hold Yan down, but we know Yan's cardio is great. He could tire O'Malley out and he could wear him down, but the thing is that probably isn't going to happen until at least the third round, because O'Malley's cardio is pretty good. And so Dvalishvili may be dominant in like the fourth and fifth rounds, but he needs to survive till the fourth and fifth rounds. And the amount of damage that O'Malley's likely to inflict early in this fight, and the chances of him knocking Merab out early in this fight, means that Dvalishvili may not even get the chance to wear O'Malley down. But I think it's time we took a look at a little bit of footage, because we've been making a lot of statements and saying a lot of things, and now we need some receipts. Now we need some evidence to back it up. So, we've talked a lot about how Dvalishvili doesn't do a particularly good job of taking guys down and holding them down. So what we're going to do is whiz through his fights against Henry Cejudo and Peter Yan, so that you can kind of see this point for yourself. So we will start with the Cejudo fight. It's the most recent fight, so makes sense to focus on this one. And let me just pull this up for you right now. So we're just going to skim through these fights. We're not going to take too long on them. And of course, if you want to watch these fights in their entirety, to do your own research. That's the best thing you can do, right? So we don't need to spend any time looking at how these two match up when it comes to striking. It should be obvious to everyone that Dvalishvili is in a lot of trouble when it comes to striking. So we're really just going to focus on grappling to keep this breakdown as short as I can. So here we go. So we're just going to skim through these fights, and then you can kind of see the issue with Dvalishvili's grappling. So here's the first one, right? So Dvalishvili loves the single leg. And remember this because it's going to be very significant when we go and take a look at O'Malley's fights. So Dvalishvili loves the single leg. He hits a nice inside trip to get into top position here on Cejudo. Now, this is a terrible position for Cejudo to be in because he's in the middle of the octagon. He's nowhere near the cage, which means he doesn't have the cage as a tool to wall walk back up to his feet. Now, as we watch this Cejudo fight, there's a couple things I want you to keep in mind. The first is the Cejudo is very small. So even though he's obviously an Olympic level wrestler and could be argued a better MMA wrestler than O'Malley, it is also important to remember that he's 37 years old and he's very small for the division. So he's only 5'4" with a 67.5-inch reach, and it's very important to remember that Cejudo actually started his career at bantamweight. When we look at O'Malley, he's 5'11" with a 72-inch reach. So he is a lot bigger in terms of wingspan than Cejudo. He's just a bigger man. There's no way that O'Malley could make flyweight. O'Malley's on about going up to featherweight. So in this matchup, if we're comparing Cejudo and O'Malley, we've got a small bantamweight versus a huge bantamweight, right? Or a potential featherweight versus a potential flyweight. And so even though Cejudo is a much higher level MMA wrestler than Sean O'Malley, size really matters in MMA, and Cejudo is undersized for the bantamweight division. So you'd think in a fight like this, Dvalishvili would be able to get some top control on Cejudo and hold him down. But what I want you to pay attention to in this fight, and also the Peter Yan fight, is how easily Cejudo moves around on the ground. So when we're talking about the grappling control, the physicality of a fighter in grappling positions, one way you can measure it is how much the guy on the bottom is able to move around. So if you think about a guy who has some of the strongest, heaviest, most crushing grappling control in the history of the UFC, we'll talk about a guy like Khabib, right? When Khabib would be on top of you, or he would be riding you from back control off that body lock, you would never see guys able to move around that much. It would almost seem like he weighed twice. It was almost like he was twice as heavy of them, with how he would be able to lie on top of them and weigh them down and make it really difficult for them to move. Whenever you see a guy on the bottom able to move around a lot, it doesn't matter what the level of that grappler is. It doesn't matter if they are the worst grappler in the division or the best grappler in the division. We're talking about physics here. When you see a guy on the bottom move around a lot, it's just a sign that the guy in top position doesn't have the best grappling control. It doesn't have the heaviest grappling control, is what I'm trying to say. And remember, Cejudo is 37 years old, 5'4", used to fight at flyweight, and yet look at how easily he's able to move Dvalishvili around from the bottom here. Look, he just elevates him with his left leg and just stands back up. And this is a theme that you're going to see over and over and over again in the footage that I'm going to show you. So then Cejudo gets his own little takedown here in a crazy scramble. But again, we're not going to pay too much attention to this. We're more focused on what Dvalishvili does with his offensive wrestling. So we're going to go into round 2 here. And we're very much going to focus on the grappling in these positions. So, alright, here we go. Here we go. So again, Dvalishvili loves the single leg. He likes to lead a lot of the time with the single leg and then try and, chain in the different kind of takedown techniques. Inside trips, outside trips, body lock takedowns, double legs, whatever you're really giving him. So if we just skip ahead. There we go. Okay, so single leg entry coming up from Dvalishvili. So he's in on a single leg here. And again, remember the single leg because you're going to, in a bit, get a chance to see what O'Malley's single leg defense is like. So he hits the inside trip. But again, look at how easily Cejudo gets to his knees, right? Dvalishvili hits the inside trip. And Cejudo just immediately gets to his knees. And now look at this. Look at this, guys. Look at this. Cejudo is a 5'4" flyweight who is 37 years old. And he literally crawls over to the cage like he has a child on his back. Look at this. Can you ever imagine someone crawling over to the cage like this with Khabib on their back? Look at this. Look at this. He just crawls over. He just crawls over. That is a sign that Dvalishvili's grappling control is not very strong. And then Cejudo literally just stands back up. Now, Dvalishvili sticks to him like glue. He hits a nice outside trip there. But notice again how easily Cejudo gets to his knees. And now he hesitates for a moment here. But anytime he wants to stand back up, he can. He's just got to slip that right leg out from underneath Merab and stand back up. And that's exactly what he does. So another example there of Dvalishvili getting takedowns but not being able to do anything with them. And we skip ahead. This was basically a failed takedown attempt from Cejudo. But if we then go into round 3, here's another takedown attempt. So he goes in on a single leg, also tries to hit an outside trip. Doesn't get it. Drives into the body lock takedown. And he's just chipping away against the cage. But you can see Cejudo's got that underhook that he's trying to form on the right side. And he's turning into Dvalishvili. And eventually, after a bit of hesitation from Cejudo, he turns into Dvalishvili, breaks his grip. And they're back out in the middle of the octagon. Again, another example of Dvalishvili having a little bit of grappling control. Having a little bit of grappling control. But not doing a whole lot with it. And this is a recurring theme you'll see over and over again. So here again, single leg entry, doesn't get to it. Goes to the body lock again. Look at how Cejudo just stuffs this, right? Single leg entry. Single leg entry. Cejudo just deals with it, no problem. 37-year-old flyweight. And then beautiful double leg entry here from Merab. And he just picks Cejudo up. Dumps him in the middle of the octagon. Absolutely beautiful. And by this point, Cejudo's very, very tired. But again, he has butterfly hooks here. And he just stands back up. Slips out from underneath Dvalishvili and stands back up. Another takedown that Dvalishvili didn't do a whole lot with. Can you imagine someone scrambling out from underneath Khabib as easily as that? And you can just see Dvalishvili is good at wet blanketing, guys. But he's not good at establishing dominant positions or putting guys in bad positions. And Cejudo's out of there. Now, what's significant about that? Sorry guys, my camera's going crazy. What's significant about that? And what will also be significant about the Peter Yan fight when we get into it now is Cejudo wasn't really able to score any points after round 1 or damage Dvalishvili after round 1 on the feet, right? Dvalishvili did a good job of overwhelming Cejudo with his grappling and kind of shutting down the offense of Cejudo. But the thing is, and he does the same to Peter Yan. Now, I'm not saying he can't do this to O'Malley, but we have seen how much of a sniper Sean O'Malley is. You only need to give him the slightest little opening and he can light you up, knock you out, inflict major damage. He'll throw spinning shit, flying shit. His boxing's excellent. Every time Merab shoots a takedown, he's going to have to worry about knees up the middle. There is a lot of danger for Dvalishvili on the feet. So whereas against a Peter Yan or a Henry Cejudo, he can kind of come forward spamming takedowns. When he tries to do that to O'Malley, there's going to be far more danger in the form of big counters that could be coming back his way. So in this Peter Yan fight, again, I just want you to pay attention to how often Peter Yan is easily able to work through grappling positions when Dvalishvili takes him down. So in this first round, doesn't take Dvalishvili long to go do his grappling. Again, he loves to lead off the single leg. But again, Jan just stands right back up, turns into Dvalishvili, and he's out of trouble. Now, it's in these sequences where O'Malley is going to be blasting the lead leg of Dvalishvili. He's going to be jabbing him to death. He's going to be lighting him up with combinations. He's going to be punishing him for those takedown entries. Jan's not that aggressive on the feet. Neither Cejudo, so they weren't doing that. But you can see all these takedown attempts. Like, there's a single leg here. Dvalishvili doesn't get it, doesn't score off it. And then, if this were O'Malley, O'Malley's going to go back to the middle of the octagon and carry on lighting him up with his boxing. So we're just going to skip through. We can't show you the 49 takedowns. We'll be here all day. We're just going to skip through, show as many as we can. So again, single leg entry. Good balance from Jan. And he's just out of there. And again, if this were O'Malley, it would be back to boxing. It would be back to lighting Merab up. But Jan is overwhelmed by Dvalishvili in this fight. So here's another single leg entry. Doesn't get the takedown. Gets the double underhooks. And again is out of trouble. So we've seen Dvalishvili shoot 3 or 4 takedowns in this round and not be able to do anything with any of them. So here's another takedown. And you've got to think, in these sequences where Dvalishvili isn't getting these takedowns, he's going to be getting lit up and taking big damage on the feet against O'Malley. So here we go. We want to see a bit of footage of Dvalishvili in top position, right? So you can really get a look at his top game. So there's a nice double leg. But again, similar to what we saw in the Henry Cejudo fight, look at how easily Jan is able to move around on the bottom. So Dvalishvili's got this takedown here. He's in top position, but Jan literally just stands back up. Do you know what I mean? It's like Dvalishvili has no physicality to his grappling game at all. He's relentless, but he doesn't really score with these takedowns. He's not really doing much damage. He's not really establishing dominant positions. And he's going to be taking big damage out in kickboxing range against Sean. Look at this single leg. Jan just slips his leg out, deals with it. And again, it's like, how much do you want to repeat, right? How much you want to repeat. In fact, we might just leave it there. We've made our point. Dvalishvili can do this for 5 rounds, right? You're not going to learn any more if I show you another 30 takedowns from Merab. But again, he gets the takedown here. But again, look at how easily Jan stands back up. Literally just stands back up. And so that's basically what you get from Merab. He does no damage on the feet at all. He does no damage on the ground. No damage in the clinch. He's relentless with the takedowns. But that's pretty much all he's got going for him. And he can use that to tire Sean O'Malley out and disrupt his striking for sure. But I don't think it's going to be easy for Merab to win this fight just wet blanketing Sean. Because Sean's not that easy to take down or hold down. Now let's show you a little bit of footage of that. So what we're going to do now is take a look at O'Malley's fight against Peter Yan. Now there's not tons of footage available on Sean O'Malley's takedown offense or ground game because he hasn't fought a whole lot of grapplers. But this fight does tell us a lot about Sean O'Malley's takedown defense and ability to work his way back up to his feet. And it's not terrible. And something else I will say as well. Something that if you've been watching the sport of the UFC or watching the sport of mixed martial arts for a long time, if you've been betting on the sport for a long time, you'll know what I'm talking about here. So Merab Dvalishvili is a better MMA grappler than Peter Yan. However, if someone like Peter Yan uses a grappling heavy game plan, they are a more difficult stylistic matchup for O'Malley than Dvalishvili. So I'll repeat myself just so you, because I know it's a little bit complicated. It's a bit of a paradox. So Merab Dvalishvili is a better MMA grappler than Peter Yan. But if both Dvalishvili and Peter Yan were to use grappling heavy game plans against Sean O'Malley, even though Dvalishvili is the better MMA grappler, Peter Yan is the more difficult stylistic matchup for O'Malley. And the reason being, Peter Yan has the element of surprise on his side, and he can set up his takedowns far better than Merab can. So Peter Yan has got good footwork, good movement, good striking, which means when Peter Yan comes forward, he's a lot more difficult to read. You don't know if a head kick's coming, a spinning elbow, a right hand, or a takedown entry. Sean O'Malley's got a lot to think about in this fight. So when Peter Yan comes forward, he can't fully commit to defending himself against strikes because that would expose his lower body to takedown attempts. And he can't start to defend a takedown attempt early because that would leave his head open to big strikes. So O'Malley's stuck in kind of this halfway position where he doesn't know what to expect from Yan, which makes Yan much more difficult to work out and much more difficult to deal with. Whereas with Dvalishvili, look, at the end of the day, we've all got two hands, two arms. Dvalishvili can throw a punch, right? But there's far more risk when you've got someone like Peter Yan coming forward than when you've got someone like Dvalishvili coming forward. For the most part, when Dvalishvili's coming forward, all O'Malley needs to worry about is his lower body, getting those underhooks in play early and trying to deal with a takedown attempt as early as possible. Doesn't need to worry so much about Dvalishvili striking. And so Dvalishvili is far more predictable than Yan and far easier to work out. I'm not saying Dvalishvili's style is easier to deal with. He's absolutely relentless. But there are no surprises in this fight for Sean. He knows exactly what to expect. That's not the case when you face a more dangerous and more well-rounded fighter like Peter Yan. So here we've got the first bit of takedown defense from O'Malley. You can see Yan shoots a takedown and goes to this body lock back control position, which Dvalishvili obviously likes. So what Sean needs to do in this position is try and slowly turn into Yan and get underhooks to disengage and basically get back to the middle of the octagon. So you can see that's what he's doing here. He's got that underhook on the right side, turns into Yan, perfect technique. That's exactly what you want to see Sean O'Malley do. So it doesn't take long for Yan to shoot another takedown. So we can see here he sets his takedown up with the strikes, and that's why this is a difficult fight for Sean, because he needs to respect Yan's striking. So where Yan is using that striking to set up the takedown entry, it's a very difficult thing for Sean to have to deal with. But still, despite this, as Yan shoots in any second now, you can see that he starts to fight for an underhook on the left side. He does get taken down, but immediately starts to push down on the head to try and free his legs and wall walk back up to his feet. So you can see Yan tries to flatten O'Malley out here. And remember what I was talking about when it comes to the physicality of different MMA grapplers, right? We know Dvalishvili doesn't have a heavy top game, and already you can see O'Malley creating space for himself off his back. So you can see he starts to open his guard up here, starts to push off on the hips of Yan, gets his back tight to the cage, and immediately scrambles back up to his feet. Then he turns into Yan and gets right back on top of Yan with the strikes. And this is what differs from Dvalishvili's performance against Yan and Cejudo compared to O'Malley. What you really notice about this fight is every time Yan tries to take O'Malley down, O'Malley immediately punishes him, starts throwing those combinations, starts throwing the jabs. And so you've got yourself in a situation where Dvalishvili's not really going to be scoring many points in these grappling positions. But as soon as O'Malley pops back up to his feet, which he should be able to do based on this performance, and the fact that, you know, Dvalishvili doesn't have particularly good grappling control, O'Malley should be able to score big with his striking. So if we go into round 2 now. So this is a bad position for O'Malley to get taken down in, because he's out in the middle of the octagon, right? So he's out in the middle of the octagon. He doesn't have the cage that he can use to wall walk back up to his feet. it's a bad position for O'Malley to find himself in. And so it's not going to be easy for O'Malley to get back up if Dvalishvili puts him in a position like this, which at some point in the fight he's more than likely going to be able to do. However, we've already seen in the Henry Cejudo fights, the Peter Yan fights, how Dvalishvili doesn't have the heaviest top game. And you can already see Sean moving around a lot on the bottom, trying to create space for himself off his back with the active guard. And again, in these positions, Dvalishvili doesn't score many points. So you can see Yan postures up here. And then any second now, you can see O'Malley starts to roll for an armbar, create space for himself off his back, and then gets to his knees and he's back up. Almost. He'll be back up in a second. Gets to his knees here. There we go. And he's back up. And you can see when you've got Peter Yan in these positions, how the physicality is stronger in these positions than Dvalishvili. So even though Dvalishvili is more relentless than Yan, I don't feel he has the same physicality in these positions. You can see Yan's grappling control is much tighter, much stronger. See, you can see in these positions, Yan just looks a lot stronger than Dvalishvili. And yet, O'Malley's able to get those underhooks in play, get the fight back to the middle of the cage. Again, O'Malley gets taken down, immediately back up. And what is really, really notable to me in this fight is how every single time Yan gets a takedown, O'Malley is on him like this, peppering him with jabs, lighting him up with strikes. We didn't see any of that in the Cejudo and Yan fights against Dvalishvili. They completely let him off the hook. They were mesmerized by his grappling. I don't think we're going to get that from O'Malley. And what you also notice about this fight is the longer the fight went, the better O'Malley started to do with the takedown entries. So early in the fight, he was reacting to the takedown entries very late. But as the fight went on, he was getting those underhooks in play earlier. He was starting to deal with the takedown attempts a lot better. Like you see here, straight away, he's looking to push off on the hips of Yan and get back up. Now you can see him taking big deep breaths on the bottom here. So it's possible that Dvalishvili could wear him out with his relentless grappling. That's the biggest risk factor to this bet. But I do believe Yan has way better grappling control, much stronger grappling control than Dvalishvili. I think it will be far easier for O'Malley to pop back up to his feet when Dvalishvili's on top of him as opposed to Peter Yan. So now if we go into the third round, you can start to see O'Malley get a bit of a read on the takedown entries from Yan. So now that we're into the third round, I think Yan kind of caught O'Malley by surprise. I think O'Malley was probably expecting a kickboxing match. And when Yan came out with a wrestling heavy game plan, I think it really caught O'Malley off guard. And so you can start to see O'Malley do a better job of reading the takedown entries, starting to stuff them much earlier than he did in round 1 and 2. And in this round, he starts to neutralise the threat of Yan's wrestling much better than he did in rounds 1 and 2. And that's huge because remember what I said, Yan has the element of surprise on his side. He has the footwork, the movement, the striking to set up his takedown entries. Dvalishvili doesn't have that. So if we skip through, remember Dvalishvili loves the single leg entries. And you can see Yan in on a single leg entry here. Nice balance from O'Malley. Is able to stuff it. And as soon as he stuffs the takedown, he gets right back on top of Peter Yan, punishing him for that takedown attempt, which is huge. This is something that neither Cejudo nor Yan did to Dvalishvili. And Peter Yan's striking defense is far better than Dvalishvili's. Like you see this takedown entry here, right? Beautiful double leg entry here from Yan. O'Malley reads it early, sprawls out of it. And again, I just think Yan's way more physically imposing in these grappling positions. And O'Malley's back up. Gets that underhook on the right side. feeds Yan the single leg. Keeps that underhook on the left side, making it difficult for Yan to get deep in on the legs. And you see Yan transition to the double leg and yank O'Malley's legs out from underneath him. But then again, look at this. Look at this. Look at the urgency that O'Malley shows here from the bottom. Starts attacking with a Kimura, but he uses the threat of the Kimura to get to his knees. And then again just stands back up. And remember what we've seen in the Dvalishvili fights. He doesn't have particularly good grappling control. In my opinion, doesn't have the kind of heavy, crushing, physically imposing grappling control that Peter Yan does. And we're in the third round here. This fight's been contested at a relentless pace, and yet O'Malley's still got the energy to pop back up after being taken down. And when he's back up on the feet, gets right back to his striking. Straight back up. I love the urgency from O'Malley to pop back up whenever he gets taken down. Just rolls out of that there. Still got the energy to roll out and creates crazy scrambles. And right back on the striking. And you've got to think, right, for Dvalishvili, we've seen him spam takedowns against Cejudo and Peter Yan. But he hasn't taken any damage in those fights. How effective is his offensive wrestling going to look after he's eaten 200 jabs or been knocked down or body kicked, had his legs beaten up with leg kicks? You know, that kind of stuff is exhausting. No one's really made Merab pay for how bad he is defensively and how reckless he is on the feet. So, let's summarize everything that we've seen. So, this is one of those fights where it's definitely going to be a competitive matchup, right? It could go either way. There's no safe bets or super strong positions on this one. But we've got to look at the big picture. Dvalishvili might have a staph infection. He definitely has a cut on his right eye that is likely to open up very early on into this fight. He doesn't have the best grappling control. And O'Malley does show a lot of urgency to work his way back up to his feet. So you've got to ask yourself the question. This is obviously a 5-round fight. Do you think Dvalishvili is going to be able to outscore O'Malley in 3 of those 5 rounds to win a decision, when we consider how much damage O'Malley is likely to be able to do on the feet, and he also poses the threat of knocking Dvalishvili out because of how bad Dvalishvili's striking defense is? I just don't see Dvalishvili's wet blanket style being effective enough to outscore the damage that O'Malley's going to put on Dvalishvili on the feet. I just don't see it. If Dvalishvili was one of these guys that inflicted tons of damage with ground and pound, or had slick back takes, or, you know, a really heavy top game, then I would obviously be a lot more reluctant in betting on O'Malley. But I just think this is going to be one of those fights where every time Dvalishvili hits a takedown, he might get 30, 40 seconds, a minute of top control, but then I think O'Malley, for the most part, is just going to be able to work his way back up to his feet. And when he does, he's going to get back to peppering Dvalishvili and lighten him up. And so that's fundamentally why I think O'Malley is a decent bet here in the even money odds range. The sweetener is that Dvalishvili may have a staph infection. If he does, he's unlikely to be able to fight at that high pace. And also on top of that, I do think that cut's going to open up very, very early on. So that's why I like O'Malley in this fight. That's why I'll be betting him. Let me know what you think. And yeah, it's going to be a great fight. It's going to be a competitive fight for sure. So in terms of the over-under on this one, it's a tricky one, actually. The over-under is in the even money odds range. And to be honest with you, I kind of agree with that. Because on one hand, you know, I do kind of lean towards the under, just because I think most likely outcome here is O'Malley by knockout. I just think it's going to be really difficult for Merab to survive 25 minutes in there with O'Malley without getting caught by something big. However, O'Malley is the kind of guy that you can take down. And so Dvalishvili can disrupt O'Malley's rhythm with the wrestling. He can wet blanket him. He can wear him down to the point where he might not be as dangerous on the feet. And so I am kind of torn on that. My lean is on the fight not to go to a decision, because I think most likely outcome is O'Malley by knockout. But I don't love the over or under on this. I can see why the odds are very divided. So if we consider the prop bets on this one, like I said, I think most likely outcome is O'Malley by knockout or TKO, but the odds are absolutely terrible. O'Malley by decision, the odds aren't great. The odds aren't great. Yeah, I'm not too keen on the props there. I would give them a miss. So I hope you found that useful. Let's move on to the next fight. Alright, now let's take a deep dive into the co-main event, which is another fantastic fight, and this time we're going to be talking about the matchup between Alexa Grasso and Valentina Shevchenko, which is obviously the third time that these girls have fought. And that makes this a very interesting fight, because we already know so much about how they match up with one another, because they've already spent so much time in the octagon fighting. And so we already know how they match up stylistically, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and we already know who's most likely to win this weekend based on the past performances. So if you are thinking of betting either of these girls this weekend, I highly recommend just taking an hour out of your day to go and watch their last two fights, because it will give you a lot of information that you need to make a really informed bet. So definitely go watch their last two fights. I'll do my best to summarize everything here, but that isn't going to be better than you seeing things for yourself. And this is a very quick and easy fight to research, because they have both fought twice previously. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Grasso is the slight favourite at average odds of about 1.72, which is going to be minus 139 for an implied probability of 58%. And if we take a look at the odds on Shevchenko, she's around an average of 2.12, which is going to be plus 112 for an implied probability of 47%. So Grasso is 31 years old, 5'5", with a 66-inch reach, and Shevchenko is 36 years old, 5'5", with a 65.5-inch reach. So both girls about the same size, but we can see that there is a bit of an age gap. Now it is only 5 years, which, statistically doesn't give the younger fighter in Grasso much of an advantage. However, obviously, whenever we are talking about age trends and age statistics, it's an average of, all age gaps, right? So when we talk about the statistical advantage for the younger fighter in a fight where there's a 5-year age gap, that's including situations where, a 33-year-old is facing a 28-year-old and a 30-year-old is facing a 25-year-old. And what these age statistics really show is obviously fighters that are in their late 30s or in the stage in their careers where they may start to decline, they tend to struggle against younger, hungrier fighters. So even though, being 5 years younger than your opponent statistically doesn't give you a big edge, in the context of this fight, it actually could. Because at 31 years old, Alexa Grasso is in her prime. She's in her athletic prime. She's going to still be improving from fight to fight. Whereas Shevchenko is getting pretty old now for a flyweight at 36 years old. She should be starting to decline. And, at the very least, you wouldn't expect her to have improved that much coming into this matchup this weekend. And so, at 36 years old, we know the lighter weight classes are all about speed, reflexes, and athleticism. We've already talked about that with Dvalishvili. Both these girls are definitely on opposite career trajectories right now, where Shevchenko's on the down, Grasso's on the up. And, that kind of thing is pretty significant. We've been talking a lot in my Discord recently about how, these young, hungry, up-and-coming fighters, in these title fights, in these main event matchups, even when they've got bad stylistic matchups in front of them, they just find ways to win. You know, we've seen it in some main events recently with, Caio Borralho, Jared Cannonier. You know, Cannonier was a tough fight for Borralho, but Borralho made light work of him. We saw it with Spivak and Tybura. You know, Tybura's in his late 30s, not an easy stylistic matchup for Spivak. Again, Spivak made light work of him. You know, Bobby Green, Paddy Pimblett, right? Paddy Pimblett, he's got cardio issues. His striking defense isn't the best. Bobby was a tough fight for him. And again, Paddy made light work of him. So, you know, these, and even another example last weekend, right? Sean Brady against Gilbert Burns. Gilbert Burns wasn't an easy fight for Sean Brady, but Brady made it look easy in the end. So, you know, these older declining fighters do tend to struggle in these big main events, these big title fights against younger, hungrier bulls, and that's a trend definitely going in favour of Alexa Grasso coming into this fight. Is Valentina Shevchenko in a bit of a similar position right now to Kamaru Usman when he fought Leon Edwards? I mean, when you look at what Belal Muhammad did to Leon Edwards, how easily he was able to take him down and out-grapple him, it's kind of crazy that Kamaru Usman couldn't do that with how good of a grappler Kamaru Usman is. But it's almost like when these champions that have been, dominant for so long then lose their title and they try to get it back, they just don't seem to have the same fire that they once did. And that's also something you've got to think about if you're betting on Shevchenko this weekend. But all that stuff are intangibles, right? We don't really know, how Shevchenko is going to look this weekend. Our best indication for how she's going to look this weekend is how she's looked in her last two fights against Grasso. And so the last two fights between these two tell us a lot about how these two match up stylistically and who's likely to win. So let's get into it. So in terms of how these two match up when it comes to striking, I actually got a bit of a shock when I researched these two, because I was quite surprised to see that Grasso had a decent advantage on the feet over Shevchenko. Shevchenko has built her career off being a fast, explosive striker that has got tons of highlight reel knockouts on her record. And Grasso, isn't really that flashy on the feet. She's not explosive. She doesn't have the big knockout power. She's very industrious. She's like a hard-working, high-volume, blue-collar striker, but doesn't really have too much power in her hands. So I was quite surprised when I watched their last two fights and saw that Grasso definitely had the advantage when it came to striking. She landed the harder, more damaging, more impactful shots to the extent where it didn't really look like Shevchenko could hurt her very much. Grasso was notably the bigger, more powerful, more physically imposing fighter, which was a bit of a shock to me, because obviously Grasso is quite slight, she's quite feminine, she's more of a volume striker, and Shevchenko's got all these big highlight reel knockouts on her record, but it's actually Grasso that seems to land the harder, more impactful shots, which caught me off guard. I didn't expect that. Now, that is going to be difficult to show you in footage without making this breakdown super long, because there's so much grappling in their last two fights that Grasso doesn't get like long sequences on the feet to do her thing with striking. So to show you footage of it would make this breakdown very long. But whenever the fight is on the feet, up until the beginning of the fifth round in their second fight, where Valentina did a lot of damage with her jab, Grasso was very, very comfortable on the feet at all times in the other two fights. All I would say is that the only issue that I had with Grasso's striking in the previous two fights is that she was a bit of a slow starter. If you watch the last two fights, Valentina finds her range almost immediately and goes to work and starts landing hard, clean, accurate strikes almost immediately, where it took Grasso like a round to warm up. But once Grasso had found her range going into the second round of both fights, her boxing looked great, and for the most part she outstruck Shevchenko, like I say, right up until the fifth round of the second fight. So, to see that kind of striking edge yourself, go watch their last two fights and you'll see it for yourself. But anyway, I'm giving Grasso a decent advantage if the fight stays standing. And I think if she can keep this fight standing, she'll likely outstrike Valentina Shevchenko and at the very least win a decision this weekend. But when it comes to grappling, things get a lot more complicated, a hell of a lot more complicated. And this is where I can show you some video clips to show that this fight is most likely going to be decided by whether or not Grasso can keep this fight standing. So what I would say about Alexa Grasso is her takedown defense is very, very bad. So Shevchenko can get her down easily. The complicated aspect of this fight is that Grasso is one of these times that is very slow, often very slow, to work through bad positions on the ground. So what's frustrating about a fighter like Alexa Grasso is that she shows us that she has the correct, or she shows us that she knows what to do. She shows us that she's got the correct technique to work through bad positions on the ground. But she quite often takes an absolute eternity to do so. I will show you some footage of this in a moment, but the point I'm trying to make is Grasso is one of these fighters that if you take her down and put her on her back, she absolutely can work back up to her feet, but she often chooses not to for like 2 or 3 minutes, which allows her opponent to run the clock down, control her, and score a bunch of points on the ground. It's really, really frustrating. And so she is a difficult fighter to trust. What I will say, though, is there is big improvements in her defensive wrestling, her takedown defense, and her ground game in between these two fights. So Valentina had far more success with her grappling in the first fight than she did the second. And there was obviously 6 months between these two fights. So that indicates to us that in the 6 months between these two fights, Grasso had obviously worked hard on her ground game and had, made a reasonably good amount of improvement to her ground game. So with this fight being, almost exactly 1 year on from their second fight, I'm optimistic that Grasso will have improved her takedown defense and ground game to the extent where Shevchenko's grappling will be nowhere near as effective as it was. But at the same time, Grasso is frustrating to watch because she does make a lot of basic fundamental mistakes on the ground. So if we bring up some footage, and you guys can see what I mean, we might actually just focus on one fight to try and keep this breakdown as short as possible, because I think one fight is probably going to make the point, and we don't need to go too deep on this one. Like I say, this is an easy fight to research. You can just go watch their last two fights to see for yourself. And also, to be fair to Alexa, like I say, their first fight, Grasso has improved a lot since that. So this last fight between them, the rematch, is going to give you a much more accurate representation of what to expect from Alexa in the fight this weekend, the third one. So if we skip through, we're just going to focus on the grappling here. We may actually show you a little bit of striking to show you the advantages that the Grasso's got on the feet. In fact, I think we will. But I just want you to pay attention to the grappling for now. So there's been no grappling in this first round so far. And then Shevchenko looks for a takedown, gets the body lock, and you can see Grasso goes down very easily, right? So Grasso's not in a particularly bad position here. There's 1 minute and 16 left to go in the round, and she's been taken down right next to the cage, so she's in a good position to try and wall walk back up to her feet. So we hit play. The concerning thing about Grasso here for me is that you can see she's just very weak off her back. She just kind of lies on her back doing nothing. Now remember when we were looking at the footage of O'Malley and Peter Yan and Cejudo on the bottom, we were talking about how as soon as they were taken down by Merab, they were immediately looking to create space themselves off their back. Alexa doesn't really do that, and you can see how weak she is on her back here. She's given up mount. Now she's trying to give up her back to shrimp out of the mount position. But it took her a while, man. It took her a while. You can see her here. It took her a while. She had to be mounted before she showed any urgency to pop back up to her feet. And then she did pop up to her feet, which is all great. But she just hesitated for a little bit too long for me. Now, if we go into this round, this is the most concerning round for me. We'll just show a bit of the striking as well, because it's actually the striking that causes Valentina to try and take her down in this round, because Alexa has her in some trouble with some striking. So when you can see, when they both exchange, you can see that Grasso's just able to hurt Valentina and back Valentina up a lot more than Valentina can hurt and back her up. So years ago, I remember watching Shevchenko's fight against Joanna Jędrzejczyk, and Jędrzejczyk couldn't really hurt Shevchenko because she couldn't match Shevchenko's physicality. That's very much how this fight feels on the feet between Grasso and Shevchenko. It's almost like Shevchenko doesn't appear to have the power to hurt Grasso, whereas every time Grasso lands clean and hard, she backs Valentina up, and you can see that, her power actually bothers Valentina. So when they exchange, we'll see if we can get some little exchanges in here. You see there, like, Valentina lands some clean shots, but Grasso doesn't back up an inch. And then when you see Grasso land, like you see there, right, Valentina's landing doesn't really bother Grasso. Grasso lands, and she hurts Valentina with a big shot. So then that obviously gives Valentina the urgency to start working for a takedown, which you can see here. So Valentina shoots a nice double leg, and again, Alexa goes down very easily. So here there's 2 minutes 55 left in the round. There's a real long time left in the round. And what you want Grasso to do here is, again, exactly what Peter Yan and Henry Cejudo did against Dvalishvili. You want to see her start to create a lot of space for herself off her back and try to pop back up. But instead, with 2 minutes 50 seconds left to go in the round, she just lies there doing absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. And at this point in the round, she's been on the ground, on her back for a minute. If we hit play, again, she's just doing absolutely nothing until Valentina gets bored and decides to let her back up, which is a very, very bad decision. This is not Grasso creating this space for herself. This is Valentina giving it to her. But with 1 minute 25 seconds left on the clock, Alexa's been on the ground now for a good amount of time, but she still doesn't show any urgency to stand back up. Still here, she just lies on her back, allowing Valentina to hammer her with leg kicks. At this point, she's been on the ground for almost 2 whole minutes, just accepting being on her back, showing no urgency to get back up to her feet. And you see this a lot from Alexa, not only in this fight, but also the first fight between Shevchenko and Grasso, which is a big red flag. Because look, for this entire, how long is it? For like 30, 40 seconds, Valentina is basically inviting Grasso back up to her feet. Grasso just continues to lie on her back. And then Shevchenko's like, oh, okay, I'll come back into your guard then. I'll come back into top position. And then she just ends the round in top position. So there you can see it. Shevchenko gets the takedown with about 3 minutes left to go in round 2. And then Grasso just lies on her back for the entire round and does absolutely nothing, which is obviously a giant red flag. So if we go into round 3, we'll just skim through round 3. And also, more concerningly, you can see Grasso's takedown offense is just very bad. She gives up such cheap takedowns. We can see another one here. Shevchenko shoots a takedown, turns the corner, puts Grasso on her back straight into half guard. So here, there's 3.5 minutes left to go in round 3. So if we hit play, here you can see Grasso showed much more urgency to pop back up to her feet. She tried the bridge from the bottom, pivoted to her knees, and stood back up, or tried to stand back up, before Shevchenko jumped right back on that guillotine. But in that sequence, you can see she's actually showing some urgency to get back up. Here, she's trying to scramble out of the mounted guillotine, ends up getting her back taken. And then right at the end of the round, just about ends in top position, defending an armbar. But again, if we rewind the clock, Shevchenko hits a takedown with 3.5 minutes to go in round 3 and controls Grasso for pretty much the entire rest of the round. So you can start to see the issues with Grasso in this fight, where when Shevchenko chooses to grapple, she absolutely dominates Grasso. Shevchenko only gets herself into trouble when she decides to stand and strike. So if we skim through round 4, you can see here again, Shevchenko gets the takedown, or wins a scramble actually, to end up on top with about 2 minutes and 15 seconds left to go in the round. And again, Grasso's not in a bad position here because she's relatively close to the cage. She can use the cage to wall walk back up to her feet. So this isn't a terrible position for Grasso to be in. And if we just run the clock down, this time she shows urgency to pop back up. And this is what's frustrating about Grasso. Like a few minutes ago we saw her bridge off the bottom, get to her knees and almost stand back up quickly. Here she wall walked within about 20 seconds. So in this fight she shows us that she's got the ability to work through these bad positions, but she just doesn't show enough urgency a lot of the time to do it. And don't get me wrong, she shows a lot more urgency in this fight than she did in their first fight, but she's still very frustrating and she still gives up very cheap takedowns. And she is one of these fighters that if you put her on her back, I just don't trust her not to show, I just don't trust her to quickly work through that position. So if we just check out the rest of this round, again, body lock takedown here from Shevchenko is very late in the round. But there you can see again, this time Grasso shows more urgency to pop back up. So in round 5, obviously, Grasso goes Super Saiyan, ends up getting the submission. It's all good. It's all good. But that pretty much gives us a good amount of footage to talk about, because I really do think this fight's going to be decided by whether or not Shevchenko can get the fight to the ground and keep the fight on the ground. Because the thing is, when we look at the footage of Dvalishvili, right, he gets a lot of takedowns, but his grappling control is not great. You know, we see guys like Zellhuber and Yan able to pop up to their feet pretty quick after they're taken down. You can see from the way that, guys can move around a lot on the bottom against Dvalishvili that he doesn't have the strongest grappling control or the heaviest top game. It's different with Shevchenko. When she gets on top of girls, she does have heavy grappling control. Grasso doesn't do a particularly good job of creating space for herself off the bottom. So if Shevchenko comes in with a grappling heavy game plan in this fight, we've just seen in the footage that I've shown you that she can rack up a lot of control time and score a lot of points and neutralize the threat of Grasso's striking. And of course, O'Malley's striking poses a far bigger threat to Dvalishvili than Grasso's striking does to Shevchenko, because Shevchenko is a very skilled striker in her own right. She's not a low-level striker like O'Malley. She has far better defense. And of course, Grasso's not as skilled, as dynamic, or as dangerous as O'Malley. So in many ways, the main event and co-main have a similar dynamic. But there are also nuances that make them very, very different. So in terms of how I see this fight from a betting point of view, my lean is definitely Grasso, purely based on the fact that she has shown us that she has the technique and ability to work through the bad positions that Valentina puts her in on the ground. My issue with Alexa is that she just doesn't do it quick enough, which enables Shevchenko to run the clock down and score a lot of points on the ground, because Grasso takes an eternity to work her way back up to her feet most of the time. But she has also shown that when she does make a conscious effort to pop back up to her feet after being taken down, she can do it. And so when it comes to Alexa Grasso, she doesn't really need to improve anything other than her decision making and her urgency. She's already got the technique, she's already got the cardio, she's already got the strength and the physicality, she's already got the skills. She just needs to think a bit quicker. And with how much she improved from this fight to this fight, and now with their third matchup being 1 year on from their last fight, I'm optimistic that Grasso will have, looked at the last two fights, seen that her grappling is causing her issues, and probably thought to herself, you know, if I just show a bit more urgency to work through these bad positions on the ground, this is not a bad fight for me at all, and I should beat Valentina in this third fight. So, yeah, it's an interesting matchup. You know, based on how their last two fights went, I think it's more likely that Valentina wins. If both these girls show up and perform how they did in their last two fights, I think it's more likely that Grasso wins, just because Valentina was winning the first fight pretty comfortably until she got submitted out of nowhere, and one knockdown in the second round of that fight, I think changed the outcome of this fight quite a lot. Had Grasso not got that knockdown kind of out of nowhere in round two, I think Shevchenko very likely would have gone on to win this fight. So Shevchenko has almost beaten Grasso twice now. So will Grasso get third time lucky? Who knows? But what I would say is Valentina is obviously declining. 36 years old, pretty old for a flyweight. And Grasso wouldn't have to improve very much to cause Valentina big problems. So based on that, Grasso is my lean. But I prefer to only bet on things where, you know, we can actually look at footage and with a pretty high degree of certainty know what to expect from the fight. For example, you know, when we researched Dvalishvili versus O'Malley, we can see that O'Malley does show urgency to work through grappling positions on the ground, and we can see that Dvalishvili doesn't have the best grappling control. So even though Dvalishvili may wear O'Malley out with his relentless grappling, before that happens, he's probably going to take a lot of damage in the process. And so, you know, these are things we can actually see. They're undeniable based on past fights. With Grasso, a bet on Grasso would be very speculative because we hope that she will have improved, because it would make sense that she's improved or will have improved, but we can't be sure. So my lean is definitely Grasso, but I'm not going to be betting her. So in terms of the over-under on this fight, obviously both these girls have almost fought to 2 decisions now. Their last fight went to a decision. Their first fight almost went to a decision. It finished very late in round 4. So, you know, very likely this fight goes deep as well. Unfortunately, the odds are absolutely terrible on this fight to go to a decision. Absolutely terrible to go deep. So I wouldn't be betting that. But I do think it's very likely this fight goes deep. And in terms of the most likely outcomes for the props, I do think the most likely outcome is Grasso by decision, but I don't like the odds. I think the odds are very, very steep. And so based on that, there aren't really any props that I like. I wouldn't be betting anything else. Both girls around about the same odds to win by decision. So I would give that a miss, and I hope you found that useful. So I broke down the fight between Brian Ortega and Diego Lopes when they were originally scheduled to fight at UFC 303. So I'm just going to drop that breakdown video in now. Okay, now let's break down the co-main event on this card, which is going to be Brian Ortega versus Diego Lopes. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Diego Lopes is the favourite at average odds of about 1.70, which is going to be minus 143 for an implied probability of 59%. And if we take a look at the odds on Brian Ortega, he's around an average of, say, 2.18, which is going to be plus 118 for an implied probability of 46%. So Ortega is 33 years old, 5'8", with a 69-inch reach. And Lopes is 29 years old, 5'11", with a 72.5-inch reach. And so we can see Lopes and Ortega around about the same size. You can see Lopes a little bit longer and taller, but nothing major in terms of size difference between these two. Although, late this week, this fight was changed from featherweight to lightweight, where most fights in the careers of these two, pretty much all of them in the case of Ortega, taken place in the featherweight division. And this was on the request of Ortega, who was struggling to make weight, which isn't a good thing, because obviously it could indicate an injury or not the best training or preparation for this fight. So that's a bit of a red flag with Mr. Ortega coming into this matchup. So, in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, it's not the easiest fight to predict because we don't know that much about Diego Lopes. He has had 30 pro fights, but if we look at his record, his last 3 fights have ended very quickly. The fight against Zellhuber was his UFC debut on short notice. And then his fights prior to that frequently went to a decision, and he looked pretty shit. He looked pretty low level. But these fights were between 3 and 5 years ago. So it's dangerous to put a lot of weight into these performances, because he obviously could have improved a lot since then. But a lot of Diego Lopes's past fights suggest he's not very good. He's quite a low level fighter. And the problem we've got is his last 4 fights don't really tell us a whole lot, because he looked awful against Movsar Evloev. I'll show you a little bit of footage to back that up. And then he's finished his last 3 opponents very, very quick, which don't really give us a very good reflection of where he's currently at in his career in 2024. So, what I'm going to do is explain to you how I see this fight stylistically, how these two match up, and then I'll show you a bit of footage on Lopes to kind of back up some of the things that I'm going to say in terms of how these two match up. So, if the fight stays standing, Diego Lopes should have the advantage. What I've noticed about Lopes is he's very tanky. He does seem to have that abnormal power for the division. Hits very, very hard. When he lands clean and hard on people, he really gets their attention. He really hurts them. And we know that Brian Ortega is very bad defensively. He's a bit of a sitting duck on the feet. And he doesn't really have any power in his hands. So, whereas Diego Lopes is very wild and very reckless and bad defensively, doesn't really need to worry so much about that against Brian Ortega, because there's not a whole lot of danger coming back at him in the form of, powerful fight-ending counter-strikes. So on the feet, Lopes has kind of got a license to run wild and do whatever he wants and go after Ortega as aggressively as he wants, because I don't think Ortega's got anything for him on the feet. So if this fight stays standing, I give a big advantage to Diego Lopes. I wouldn't rule out the possibility that he knocks Brian Ortega out. Now, if this fight goes to the ground, I think Diego Lopes is in a universe of trouble, because he's got a base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but Brian Ortega is levels and levels and levels and levels above Diego Lopes. Lopes is pretty low level on the ground. I know, again, people will rush to tell me about all these crazy submissions he's hit on guys, but there are levels to the game, and Ortega is in a different universe when it comes to MMA grappling than Diego Lopes. If these two mix it up on the ground on Saturday night, you're going to get to see the level between these two is not even close. And so, when I am trying to predict the outcome of this matchup, I'm really trying to work out what the probability is that this, or a big chunk of this fight, will take place on the ground. Because we already know if it stays standing, Diego Lopes is probably going to win pretty easily. I can't imagine Ortega being able to outstrike Lopes. Certainly not going to be able to match his power or the impactfulness of his shots. But if the fight goes to the ground, I think Lopes is absolutely cooked. I think he's screwed. I think he's got no chance. So, first of all, we've got to consider the ways in which this fight could go to the ground, right? So the first and most obvious way is Brian Ortega trying to take Diego Lopes down. And then we've got to question what Ortega's offensive wrestling is like, what Diego Lopes's takedown defense is like. So, Brian Ortega's offensive wrestling, his takedowns, they're not great, but they're not terrible either. They are getting better. For a long time, Ortega was one of these frustrating high-level grapplers that wouldn't try that hard to get his opponents to the ground. He would kind of stand and strike and be very opportunistic with his grappling and just hope that opportunities popped up for him to go to the ground with his opponent, but he wouldn't try that hard to get fights to the ground. That's changed in his recent fights, particularly his last fight against Yair Rodriguez, where we do see some chain wrestling, we do see some persistent offensive wrestling, some persistent takedown attempts from Ortega these days. And He's not a particularly good offensive wrestler, but at least he tries now. And if he tries, obviously it increases the probability of his fights going to the ground. So then we ask ourselves, based on the level of offensive wrestling Ortega is bringing to the table, does Diego Lopes have the takedown offense to keep the fight standing? That's where this fight gets very, very complicated. Because with Diego Lopes having a base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, from what I've seen, he doesn't really try the stiff takedowns. He's more than happy to go to the ground. So his takedown offense is very, very bad. And on the ground, he tends to be one of these guys that just hunts for long shot submissions off his back rather than trying to work his way back up to his feet. And so that can get you into a lot of trouble against a guy like Brian Ortega, because you may be able to rack up 24 wins with lots of highlight reel submissions, hunting for like long shot arm bars and shit off your back against lower level grapplers. But when you start to run into some of the best fighters in the world, like the Movsar Evloevs, the Brian Ortegas, that's when the weakness within that style of grappling gets exposed, because 9 times out of 10, if you're on your back in an MMA fight, you're in a losing position. So I don't think Ortega is necessarily well equipped to wrestle in this fight and take Lopes down, but I don't think he might need to, because Lopes is the kind of guy that will pull guard, will flop to his back, will not even try the step takedowns, because he's confident in his ability to mix it up on the ground with his opponents. And if he mixes it up on the ground with his opponents against Ortega, or if he mixes it up on the ground with Ortega, I should say, I think he's going to find out the hard way. There's levels to the game, and he's nowhere near Ortega's level. So what I want to do, because a lot of people think this Diego Lopes guy is amazing, is just show you a little bit of footage of Lopes from his fight against Evloev. Now, you guys know me. Very important we look at the big picture, take everything into consideration, and what we never want to do is be harsh or overly harsh on a fighter or judge a fighter for one bad performance. We never want to do that. But at the same time, all we can do is make the best decision possible with the information that we've got available. And when you look at Lopes's fights from, 3 to 5 years ago, back 2019 to 2021, he looks very low level, in my opinion. And so, with Lopes's last 3 fights ending very quickly, the best indicator we've got of where Lopes's skill set currently lies is, unfortunately, this Movsar Evloev fight. And there's a couple of issues with that. Diego Lopes took this fight on short notice, and it was his UFC debut. And you guys know I don't like to judge guys on their UFC debut, because of octagon jitters, all that kind of stuff. They often look a lot better after they've got their debut out the way. But here, this is pretty much all we've got to work with, because Lopes is a victim of his own success, right? Finishing his last 3 opponents so quickly, these fights don't really tell us anything. So if we look at this fight against Evloev, what do they tell us? Well, they tell us that his takedown offense is awful and his ground game is pretty low level too. Now, there will be people that will rush to tell me that I'm being very harsh on Lopes because Evloev is one of the best grapplers in the division, and he almost submitted Evloev in round 1 and all this shit. But ultimately, I just say what I see. And ultimately, 9 times out of 10, if you're on your back in an MMA contest, you're in a losing position. It's just a fact. And when I see a guy like Lopes, who flops to his back easily, pulls guard, gives up cheap takedowns, and spends most of fights hunting for long shot submissions off his back, for me, in MMA grappling, that's a pretty low level MMA grappler. And it doesn't matter that Evloev is one of the best grapplers in the division. That doesn't matter, that's irrelevant. Diego Lopes pulling guard, flopping to his back, giving up cheap takedowns has nothing to do with Evloev's ability as a fighter or Evloev's style. That's a weakness within Diego Lopes's skill set. It doesn't matter who he's fighting, that weakness can be present against anyone. So, again, I don't want to make this breakdown super long, so we'll just skip through. I just want to show you the kind of negative traits from Diego Lopes that we see in this fight. So here's the first. Comes out gate super hard, super aggressive, swinging for the fences. And he gives up a very cheap takedown, right? Just flops to his back. Now, he's a BJJ guy, so he's very active off his back straight away. He starts rolling for legs, rolling for arms, all kind of shit. And again, if you want to watch this yourself, you just go Fight Pass, check it out. But I'm just trying to make the point that Lopes gives up cheap takedowns. He's very weak off his back. When he's attacking off his back with these submission attempts, he's not using these submission attempts to work his way back up to his feet. He's got a very active guard, so he's excellent at creating space for himself off his back. But instead of using that space, like here, to pop back up to his feet, where he might be able to use his feet to push off on the chest of Zellhuber and pop back up, he'd prefer to just hunt for long shot submissions off his back. Like here with the armbar attempt. Why not use this armbar attempt to try and pop back up to your feet? Instead, he just commits to the armbar and allows Zellhuber to defend it and get back into top position. And again, even like here, I'm just trying to be as quick as possible with this, right? You can watch the full fight yourself if you want. But like, any second now, like here, right? Zellhuber's fully postured up. There's loads of space here for Lopes to scramble back up to his feet or scramble over the cage and start a wall walk. But he'd rather fuck about going for arm bars and triangles. Very low level MMA grappling. And so he just continues fucking around on the ground, thinking it's a BJJ contest for the rest of the round. Round 2. See, Zellhuber shoots a takedown about midway through the round. Lopes gets taken down easily. And then again, I'm just going to skip through. Hunts for long shot submissions off his back. Fucks around from guard. Spends the rest of the round on his back. If we go to round 3. Zellhuber again gets an easy takedown. Lopes no takedown defense whatsoever. Attacking with a Kimura here. Good luck trying this against Ortega. But anyway, I'm just trying to make the point that as a BJJ guy, Lopes just commits real hard to submissions on the ground. But it's at the expense of being on the bottom the majority of the time, which is obviously a losing position 9 times out of 10 in MMA. So whenever you see a guy like Lopes is just going to give up cheap takedowns, flop to his back, hunt for long shot submissions, they're not going to reach like the top level of the sport. Because when you face decent grapplers like a Movsat Zellhuber or a Brian Ortega, they're just going to defend those submissions and stay in dominant positions and control you and rack up points and win rounds against you. So we're in a tricky situation with Lopes because he did tire out in that fight, and it's possible that he gave up cheap takedowns and kind of flopped to his back and spent a lot of time on his back because he was out of shape and he didn't have the energy to work his way back up to his feet or defend takedowns. He was coming on short notice. That's possible. But it's also possible that Lopes really fucking sucks and his takedown defense is bad. His ground game is not cut out for the highest levels of MMA, not cut out to compete against guys like Zellhuber and Ortega. And he's got kind of lucky in his last 3 fights with the quick finishes. And now when he faces a higher level of opponent like Ortega or like an Zellhuber, he's just going to get found out, exposed, dominated. I don't know which way it's going to go. My gut tells me Lopes is not very good. And my gut tells me at some point in this fight, he's going to look to mix it up on the ground with Ortega and find out the hard way that he ain't nowhere near Ortega's level. But, obviously, I don't want to judge a fighter for a short notice matchup, particularly against someone as good as Zellhuber. There's obviously issues with Ortega at the moment because he's had to switch this fight from featherweight to lightweight, so I don't feel great about betting him. And we also know that irrespective of how these two match up on the ground, Lopes will have the advantage when it comes to striking. And similar to Anthony Smith, every round starts on the feet. So, this fight's tricky. I personally think you'd have to be a crazy person to bet Diego Lopes. That's just me personally. because he looked so bad on the ground against Zellhuber that if this fight does go to the ground, I think Ortega just cooks him. I think he's screwed. I don't give him a chance. So, similar to the footage we saw of Pereira, I don't understand why anyone would put their money in danger on a guy like Pereira or Lopes, where we've seen clear and obvious weaknesses in their skill sets that their opponents are well positioned to exploit. It doesn't make sense to me why people ever place bets like that. I don't get it. So, if you do want to bet this fight, you've got to take Ortega. But if you bet Ortega, you're betting him knowing that he couldn't make weight for this fight. You're betting Ortega knowing he's a sitting duck on the feet, facing a guy with major power who's very aggressive on the feet. And you're betting a guy in Ortega who's not the best offensive wrestler. So if Lopes actively tries to keep this fight standing and actively tries to stuff takedowns, he probably can. So maybe the Zellhuber fight was just a bad night at the office, but unfortunately all we can do is try and make the best decision possible with the information we've got available. And the information from this Zellhuber fight shows that Lopes kind of sucks on the ground and his takedown offense ain't great, which means this could be a very difficult fight for him against Ortega. So there's a bit of a theme with this week's fights where you've got guys like Anthony Smith and Brian Ortega and Jiri Prohaska in similar odds ranges. And I think all three guys are the better bet. But the problem is all three guys are deeply flawed. And we've spoken in each of those individual breakdowns about the ways in which they're flawed. And so even though I believe the underdogs in these three fights give you the better risk to reward ratio, and even to be fair, why Michael Page gives you the better risk to reward ratio at dog odds, there's big issues with all of them. And you're not putting your money in a super strong position with any of them. So they're all quite clearly dog or pass matchups, but it's not like I look at any of those guys and I'm like, that's a real strong position for me to put my money. It's tricky. But that's how I see this fight. So if we look at the over-under on this one, so the over is set at 1.5 rounds. I think that's very likely to hit. But the over 1.5 rounds is about 1.44, right? Minus 227. I don't like the odds, but I think it's very likely to hit for a couple of reasons. First reason being, even though Lopes is dangerous on the feet, we know Ortega is very tough, very durable. He's got no quit in him. He's a bit of a human punching bag, right? We've seen him take a lot of damage in his fights and hang in there. So even though he is a sitting duck on the feet, very vulnerable to getting knocked out by Lopes. Usually you have to damage Ortega and wear him down a bit before you can get him out of there through TKO. It's not easy to just flash KO this guy. He's got one of those crazy good chins and insane toughness. Also, because both guys are BJJ guys, you'd think that they would have a decent level of submission defense to hang on the ground with each other for a while. And so if a submission were to come, it would likely come deeper in the fight where one guy becomes more tired on the ground and not as able to defend themselves. So, because of the fact that Ortega is a sitting duck on the feet and Diego Lopes is dangerous with his striking, and because Ortega is very high level on the ground with a dangerous submission game, and I don't think Lopes is very good on the ground at all, I wouldn't bet the over 1.5 rounds at steep favourite odds, because both guys are dangerous in their areas of expertise. Lopes on the feet, Ortega on the ground, of course. I mean, on the feet isn't necessarily Lopes' area of expertise. He's a BJJ guy, but in the context of this fight, he needs to fucking keep the fight standing because Ortega smokes him on the ground. Both guys are dangerous, so I wouldn't touch the over, but the over would be my lean. In terms of the props on this fight, I would go for... I actually like Ortega by submission at 6.5 plus 550. Just because I think the chances of them mixing it up on the ground are pretty high. And I think if the fight goes to the ground, I think Ortega will drown Diego Lopes. So it's not something I would bet myself, but I'm surprised the odds are that good. And so, if you do want to sprinkle a little bit of money on this fight to make watching it more interesting, I would take Ortega by submission. But you know me, I'm not the biggest fan of props. So I hope you found that useful. Alright, now let's break down the fight between Daniel Zellhuber and Esteban Ribovics. We like Ribovics a lot. We bet him in his last fight against Terence McKinney. He came through for us in a big way, but he's got a far more difficult fight ahead of him this weekend against Mr. Zellhuber. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see the Zellhuber is the favourite at average odds of about 1.42, which is going to be minus 238 for an implied probability of 70%. And if we take a look at the odds on his opponent, Esteban Ribovics, he's around an average of, say, 2.85, which is going to be plus 185 for an implied probability of 35%. So Zellhuber is 25 years old, 6'1" with a 77-inch reach, and Ribovics is 28 years old, 5'10" with a 69-inch reach. So both these guys are very young. They should be making big improvements from fight to fight. And in the case of Ribovics, he is actually making huge improvements from fight to fight. So if you go and watch his matchup against Kamela Kirk, he's virtually unrecognizable compared to how he looked in his debut against Radzhabov. He looked exponentially better. So Ribovics is a guy that could be improving at a very rapid rate. The other X factor we've got to take into consideration on this one is that Mr. Zellhuber has an 8-inch reach advantage over Ribovics, which is very substantial. Statistically, fighters with an 8-inch reach advantage win around 68% of the time, which gives Zellhuber a very, very big statistical edge based on that stat. And not only that, but Zellhuber is a fighter who likes to fight long and knows how to use his length and knows how to use his reach. So pretty big advantage for Zellhuber in a match like this that does go some way towards justifying his pretty heavy price tag, because he is obviously a big favourite. Now what's interesting is when you look at the implied probability in Zellhuber's odds of 1.42 minus 238, they are in the same sort of ballpark as the probability that he has of winning if you were to just blindly bet on those reach statistics over the long term. Obviously you don't want to do that. That would be a very foolish thing to do. But I just thought it's interesting how his odds are in the same implied probability range as his probability of winning based on his reach advantage alone. So in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, both guys are primarily strikers, and I would expect this for the most part to be a stand-up fight. So if we just briefly cover off the grappling, just in case there is any grappling in this matchup, we can then talk about how they match up when it comes to face punching. So when it comes to grappling, I do give Zellhuber a decent advantage here. Ribovics has shown in his fights against both Kamela Kirk and Loik Radzhabov that his takedown defense is pretty bad, and he's pretty weak off his back as well. Now Zellhuber's not the best grappler, he is primarily a striker, but if Zellhuber were to grapple in this fight, I think he'd be able to get Ribovics down relatively easily and would probably be able to rack up a decent amount of control on the ground because of how weak Ribovics is off his back. So the grappling is definitely an area where Zellhuber is going to have an edge. When it comes to striking though, things do get a lot more interesting. Zellhuber is a high volume striker that does a really good job at chipping away at his opponents with jabs and range finding strikes, range finding kicks. Whereas Ribovics is also a high volume striker, but there's a lot more power and impactfulness on everything that Ribovics throws. Ribovics is not as technical as Zellhuber. He doesn't have the same type of footwork and movement, but everything that Ribovics throws is to try and kill you, and he is very aggressive, and he does have major power. So this is really the volume, the technique, the footwork, the movement of Zellhuber versus the aggression, the power, and just the raw, mean, nasty violence of Esteban Ribovics. Now what's interesting about this fight is that Ribovics is similar in many ways to Francisco Prado. If we look at Prado as a fighter, I mean, not only are they both from Argentina, but Prado's got the same sort of style where, he's more powerful than Zellhuber, he's more aggressive than Zellhuber, he's like a slugger exactly like Ribovics. And Zellhuber dealt extremely well with Prado's style, played the role of matador, stayed on the outside and just used his length to chip away at Prado, light him up and inflict a lot of damage. That's most likely what is also going to happen in this fight. He's most likely going to be able to do the same thing to Ribovics. The problem is Ribovics is a lot more aggressive, a lot more dangerous than Prado, and hits a lot harder as well. And Zellhuber does like to get into big exchanges at times. He does like to stand his ground and fire back. Doesn't always like to get on his bike and kind of circle away from his opponents and counter strike. So there will be opportunities for Ribovics to land clean and hard in this fight. So it is an interesting one. In terms of how I see this fight from a betting point of view, my lean's definitely Zellhuber. We've already seen him perform well against a style similar to Ribovics, you know, with how he kind of cruised to an easy win against Francisco Prado. We also know Zellhuber's got a big advantage on the ground. He's tough, he's durable, he throws a high volume of strikes. Zellhuber's definitely more likely to win. I just really dislike his odds. If you look at his odds, you know, they carry an implied probability of 70%. You'd have to be capping this guy, you know, in that 75% range in order to get any value on Zellhuber, and that's a very difficult thing to do with Ribovics having true legit knockout power. He showed that against McKinney with how aggressive he is, how mean he is, how nasty he is, also the rate at which he's improving. I think Zellhuber's more likely to win, but there's no upside, in my opinion, in betting him in this odds range. If you are going to bet this fight, you know what? This is one of those situations where I actually don't think it's dog or pass. If you do want to bet this fight, bet Zellhuber, but know you are getting a terrible deal for your money. Know that the odds are very, 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 very bad. And for that reason, the smartest thing to do is pass, because there is not much upside in betting a guy at an implied probability of 70% against a dangerous, tough opponent like Ribovics, who's got, you know, absolutely no quit in him and will absolutely bring it this weekend and be swinging for the fences. And at the end of the day, it only takes one clean, hard shot to land for it to be all over. So if we take a look at the over-under on this one, I do think this fight is quite likely to go to a decision, simply because both guys are so tough, both are so durable. We've seen them both hurt in fights. There's no quit in them. You know, they try their best to stay in fights. They try their best to stay alive. They've got great cardio. They've got that Latin American spirit, that Latin American blood. Even though these guys will go toe-to-toe and they'll stand and bang, both guys can take a shot. And so I do think it is more likely this fight goes to a decision. I wouldn't bet it, though, because like I say, neither guy does like to take a backward step. They both like to stand and bang. They're both very aggressive. And obviously, as a result, it does only take one shot to land for someone's night to be over. So this isn't the kind of fight that I would bet an over in, even though I do think the fight is more likely to go to a decision. In terms of the prop bets on this one, the most likely outcome is Zellhuber by decision. I wouldn't bet anything else. I wouldn't bet any of the props on this fight. But the odds on Zellhuber by decision are very, very, very bad. So, you know, this is one of those fights where Zellhuber should win, but his money line odds and all his most likely ways of winning are very juiced. The odds are absolutely terrible. I definitely wouldn't bet on Zellhuber to win by knockout or TKO. I don't see him finishing Ribovics. Ribovics is too tough, too durable. Zellhuber is more of a volume striker. If there is going to be a finish in this fight, I think it will be Zellhuber. I think it will be Ribovics, knocking Zellhuber out. But Zellhuber's a tough Mexican, good defensively, knows how to use his length. So that outcome isn't particularly likely. So I hope you found that useful. Now, let's break down a very, very interesting fight, which is going to be Ronaldo Rodriguez versus Ode Osbourne. And if you are enjoying these breakdowns, if you find them useful in any way, please hit the like button. It would help push the video to more people, and it would help my channel grow. The growth on YouTube is so slow. People don't like these long form videos. So if you do like them, if you do appreciate them, it would mean the world to me if you could hit the like button so that the juice is worth the squeeze. The growth is so strong, so slow. You'd be helping me out a lot, man. The YouTube grind is not an easy one. So thank you very much in advance if you do smash the like for me. So now let's get into this fight then between Ode Osbourne and Ronaldo Rodriguez. One of the most interesting fights on the card, actually. So we can see that the odds have started to decline this week a fair amount on Ronaldo Rodriguez. And I can see why, to be fair. I was very tempted to bet Rodriguez in this fight myself. I'm not going to, but he is very tempting. So he's currently around an average of 1.70, which is going to be minus 143 for an implied probability of 59%. And if we take a look at the odds on his opponent Osbourne, we can see he's around an average of, say, 2.15, which is going to be plus 115 for an implied probability of 47%. So Osbourne is 32 years old, 5'7", with a 73-inch reach. And Rodriguez is 25 years old, 5'6", with a 65-inch reach. So straight away, we've got a pretty big X factor here. We can see that Ode Osbourne has an 8-inch reach advantage over Rodriguez, which is obviously huge. And we've already said on the fight between Zellhuber and Ribovics, the fighter with the 8-inch reach advantage statistically will win around 68% of the time. So if you are going to bet Rodriguez this weekend, I do think Rodriguez is the strongest side to be on. But if you are going to bet on Rodriguez, that's quite a strong trend to be betting against. You know, betting against a trend which wins 68% of the time, it's not easy to cherry pick that 1 in 3 times where that trend doesn't correctly determine the winner of the fight. But this isn't a bad stylistic matchup for Ronaldo Rodriguez, to be fair. He looks tough. He looks durable. Defensively, he's not the best. He doesn't move his head that much, so he does get dinged pretty clean and hard, which is a bit of a concern against someone like Osbourne, who does hit hard and obviously does have a big reach advantage. But like most Mexicans, Rodriguez is a tough fucker, and he likes to walk his opponents down, draw them into big exchanges, and he's a decent boxer. He's got decent power in his hands as well. He's durable, he's tough, he's got good cardio, he's mean, he's nasty, he's scrappy, and he fights at a high pace. He also has pretty nasty leg kicks, which could be a big weapon in this fight because Ode Osbourne does stand quite heavy on that lead leg. So both these guys are primarily strikers. For the most part, I would expect this fight to stay standing, but what I have noticed about Ode Osbourne is that when he gets tired or when he runs into trouble on the feet, he does then look to grapple, which is obviously interesting because the ground is an area where Osbourne has some pretty big holes in his game, and by him initiating grappling in some of his other fights, he's actually got himself into trouble. Now, Rodriguez is a very low level on the ground, but I do give him the advantage over Osbourne. Rodriguez does have bad takedown defense. He is weak off his back, but he's also better at working his way back up to his feet than Osbourne is, and he's better in the scramble. He showed some sneaky back takes and stuff in his UFC debut against Dennis Bondar, and so if these two do go to the ground, I do give Rodriguez the advantage. But there are also a lot of issues with Rodriguez's ground game because, like I say, he does give up cheap takedowns. Osbourne's a big, strong guy. But generally speaking, Osbourne's ground game is very low level. Lower level than Rodriguez's, in my opinion. So you've got to lean towards Mr. Rodriguez on the ground. So this is one of those fights where I do give Ronaldo Rodriguez the advantage everywhere. I think he's the better striker. I think he's the better MMA grappler. I think he's more durable. I think he's got better cardio. He's a very, very tempting bet. My issue with Rodriguez is that he doesn't move his head much. He's not the best defensively. Osbourne does have big power, and that 8-inch reach advantage is a bit of a bummer. This is one of those fights where if both guys had similar reaches, or if Osbourne didn't have such a massive reach advantage, you know, I would automatically bet Rodriguez. Rodriguez would be a no-brainer bet for me. But for me personally, I don't like to bet against strong trends. And at the end of the day, it's very, very difficult to be profitable long-term outworking trends that have got a 68% win rate. You know, I think sometimes you've just got to try and make life as easy for yourself as possible. I always say to the guys in my Discord community, you know, you can choose to play the game on hard mode or easy mode, right? We can choose to make this game as easy as we want to. Making money betting on sports is already incredibly difficult. So few people in the world make a profit betting on sports that one of the biggest weapons we've got over the bookies, over the betting sites to give ourselves the best chance of making a profit is by being really selective and choosing when we put our money at risk and choosing which bets we place and being very careful and thoughtful about the bets that we place. So if we think about it, if guys that have an 8-inch reach advantage only lose 32% of the time, it's far smarter and far easier for us to be patient and wait for, you know, those 68% of the times where we can bet a guy that we favour that also has the 8-inch reach advantage, than to try and cherry pick, you know, those 32% of fighters that are going to defy that trend. You know, I always use the expression that, you know, when I'm betting on sports, I want to be placing the kind of bets where I'm pushing a boulder down a mountain. You know, I don't want to be placing the kind of bets where I feel, track me, my camera's broken. I don't want to be placing those kind of bets where I feel that I'm pushing a boulder up a mountain, just making life difficult for myself. That's not the way that I like to do things. So my lean on this one, definitely Rodriguez, but I am not going to bet him due to that reach differential. So in terms of the most likely outcomes for props and over-unders and things like that, I do think there's a good chance this fight ends inside the distance, just because Osbourne has a tendency to slow down and Rodriguez is very, very aggressive. He does have that killer instinct. So my lean is this fight not to go to a decision, but the odds are too steep for me to bet that. You know, those odds carry an implied probability of about 65%, and you know, in order to get any value on that, you'd have to be capping the fight to end inside the distance, you know, like 70% of the time, and I can't stretch that far. So I would give that a miss, but it is more likely not to go to a decision in my opinion. And if we take a look at the prop bets on this one, most likely outcome, do you know what? The odds on Rodriguez to win by decision and by knockout or TKO virtually identical. So that isn't good. That isn't good. Both I think probably have equal kind of probability. What are the odds on Rodriguez to win in round 3? Not even that good. Not even that good. That's just based on the fact that Osbourne might slow and Rodriguez with that killer instinct may get a late finish, but the odds aren't even that good. So I would probably give that a miss. So that's going to be it for these main event breakdowns this week. If you do like these and you want to watch my breakdown videos for all the prelim fights, head on over to my website, MMABettingTips.com. Links in the description below. You just go to resources, hit breakdown videos. You can find breakdown videos for every single fight on this card. And you can also find all my pre-fight bets for this card as well. And if you really want to do something very exciting and fun, you might want to consider joining my live betting group. We make a profit on approximately 70% of UFC events. We absolutely crush it. You will absolutely love it. And yeah, it's my bread and butter. It's my speciality. And I'm very good at it. So thank you very much for watching. Please hit the like button if you haven't already. Subscribe if you haven't already. Take care, everybody. And I will see you all very soon. In fact, in next week's video. Nice one, guys. Take care. Bye.